Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's program, HUD's new map guide, What Borrowers Need to Know. I am Kathy Soroka, an attorney in Nixon Peabody's New York City office. I'm joined today by my colleague Alex Rosso, an attorney in Nixon Peabody's Boston office, Tom Bernasiak of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and Michelle Small of Merchants Capital. Before we begin, I have to cover a few logistical items. Are we okay on sound? Yes, we're good on sound. Great. Okay. So that was the first logistical item, making sure everyone could hear me. We also want to let everybody know that today's call is being recorded. A copy of the recording will be distributed in a thank you message in the next couple of days. CLE and CPE forms have been included in your reminder email and will be emailed to you in a thank you email following the program. Please follow the instructions and return the completed documents as specified on the forms. An attendee verification code will be provided during today's program, which you will need to provide in order to receive the CLE or CPE credit. During today's program, you can submit questions. There is a Q&A feature in the WebEx. On the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A box. If you don't see the box, there should be an arrow that you can hit that will expand the box. And in that box, you can type your questions. They will come to the presenters, and we will do our best to answer your questions during the webinar. We are setting aside time at the end of the webinar specifically to address your questions. So get them ready, send them in at any time. You can't throw us. This is the A team you got here on this webinar. So go ahead and send your worst. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you can also use the Q&A feature to alert us, and someone will address your technical questions. With that being said, here are our speakers. We are lawyers, so I am obligated to present a disclaimer. The content in this presentation should not be construed as legal advice, and readers should not act upon information in this presentation without professional counsel. Viewers and webinar attendees should seek advice applicable to their specific situations. The example clauses contained herein and other information presented here under are for educational purposes only. We have a large group tuning in today, and we have a lot to cover. So now that those technical matters are out of the way, we will start the official agenda. On today's program, we will provide an update on FHA production. We will talk about helpful changes to the FHA map guide that benefit borrowers. We will also highlight tighter restrictions in the map guide that borrowers should watch out for. We will provide updates on the closing process. And then, as I said before, we'll leave some time at the end for questions from the audience. First, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, we have a lot of folks looking at FHA insured loan programs for the first time recently, with all of the different changes in the economy and the historically low interest rates. So some folks may be tuning in and saying, what exactly is FHA again? The Federal Housing Administration insures mortgage loans that are given by approved lenders. FHA doesn't lend money directly. They insure loans that are provided by lenders. And those loans have to meet FHA underwriting criteria, and that criteria is set forth in the map guide. So that is that's what the map guide is in a nutshell. There are different authorities and different loan products that are available. We'll be talking primarily about 3 of them today. You may be hearing us refer to 223F loans. These are all sections of the National Housing Act. So 223F loans are loans for acquisition and refinancing of existing apartments. Does not include substantial rehabilitation. 221D4 or D4s are loans that are for new construction and substantial rehabilitation, loans that meet a certain threshold that would bump you up out of the Fs and into the D4s. And 223A7s are loans that are loans for refinancing existing loans within the FHA portfolio. Some of the benefits of FHA include long-term stable debt, 30 to 40-year long-term loan terms, and non-recourse loans, up to 90% loan to value, and very low fixed interest rates. Okay, so with that brief introduction, let me kick things over to Tom. And Tom, could you please give us a brief update on FHA production activities?
Sure, thanks, Kathy. So I'm Tom Bernasiak, Deputy Director for Multifamily Production for HUD. And so what I'd like to do is go through some of the numbers that we have for 2020 and 2021. It's been an interesting year, 2020 has, in the sense that we've all gone home in March. We HUD, and I think everybody else, were forced to work either in an office or at a kitchen table or anywhere we could find a table, actually, and work virtually. We at HUD, who are so used to using paper, and not just a little bit of paper, a lot of paper, we were forced to go completely cold turkey on no paper. So we went from working in the office to working at home. We went from working with sort of reams and reams of documents to basically staring at our computers. And I thought what I'd do is just go through very quickly where we were in the past, where we are now, and you can sort of see a story perhaps. Let's start with, this is our volume and commitment numbers through fiscal year 11 through fiscal year 21, 3/31/21, which is the midpoint of our fiscal year. So in fiscal year 13, that was our high water mark. That was the highest point of volume we've had after the 2007-2008 meltdown, when we had 50 offices. And after fiscal year 13, we began the transformation. The transformation, as most of you know, shrunk our offices from the 50 to currently what we have is 12. The years following or during the transformation had volumes of 11 billion or so, 14, 15, and 16, but then in 17 increased to 17 and 18 increased to a little over $16 billion or so. 19 was our shutdown year. That began in January, ended in March, and so we took a hit in volume, but we leveled back in fiscal year 20, which was again the pandemic year, to almost $22 billion in loan volume and 1,100 firm commitments. For fiscal year 21, and this is a figure that we're a little proud of. We have at the midpoint $17 billion in volume and 941 in commitments, which puts us on track to actually do almost $35 billion this year in FHA insurance, which is which would be historical. So stay tuned. Firm commitment volume by program. This is through 17 and 21. The first blocks. So the years you can see are the blue is 17 and it goes through 18, 19, and 20, 21. The first block of numbers is new construction, substantial rehab. Note that those numbers have been steady over the years. We're at about half of what we did in fiscal year 20. We'll probably get to the 5 billion mark this year, although with the complications for new construction currently are potentially rising interest rates, plus, and I think more importantly, rising costs. So that's becoming problematic, so we'll see. 223Fs have continued to be strong, and they represent right now the bulk of our portfolio. A7s, which are refinances of existing insured facilities, in 2020 with the lower interest rates increased to 5 billion. We're almost at that point midway through 2021. We expect to probably hit 7 to 8 billion this year, but that should level off. I think we've insured every possible project that is currently insured out there. So our affordable light tech firms, this is through 17, 18, and 19, we're averaging about 61%. So the affordable represents both the broadly affordable, as well as the light tech deals. So that's that breakdown. That's very self-explanatory. The Q, that is a subject of a lot of discussion, both internally and externally. Externally meaning with the industry. We began to have a Q in October, and at that point we begin to prioritize applications with first light tech pilot, and then secondly opportunity zone transaction qualified investment fund. We recently modified that, updated as of March 18th, such that we've expanded the Q buckets. So we still have light tech pilot, which is a priority for us as number one. We've added new light techs, 4% light, 4% and 9%. A couple of reasons for that. Number one, it is a priority of HUD, right, for affordable housing. That's one of the things we do. That in our countercyclical mission, but we do prioritize affordable. As a practical matter, for a couple of reasons, that notwithstanding the Q priority of light tech pilot, were decided that, well, the 4%, 9% credit deals also ought to be prioritized as well. So we're syncing up everybody in the entire platform to reflect what is actually what is practically going on. OZ deals with the qualified investment fund are 3. We did change. This is new. The second stage firm applications for new construction. So we didn't believe it was fair if we were going to put 4%, 9% deals up front as a formalized choice. We felt that to have a new construction market rate deal to go through the queue, which we'll talk about in a minute, but to wait in line to get to an underwriter twice is cruel and unusual punishment. And so also it is probably not good for our borrowers or lenders or for anybody for that matter. So, and probably us. And so what we did was we prioritized second stage firms such that we could give those guys priority, make sure that they meet their market considerations. And that's good for us in the sense that is good for the insurance fund, that they get those deals in line in the market when they hope to do so. The last bucket is all affordable, broadly affordable, and so on. We don't, that looks bigger than it is. That would include Section 8. But that's where we are with the Q. One thing I would say about the Q, just as a footnote, while the Q priorities are effective for deals that have been submitted after March 17th, effective March 18th, it's important to note that those deals currently in the queue will retain their position. So we won't. So if you've been waiting 30 days or 45 days to get assigned to an underwriter, you'll keep that place. So these priorities will only be for those deals that would be after March 18th. That way, there's no line jumping, and we keep some sort of consistency. We are talking about the MAP guide today, and one of the provisions of the MAP guide is a transition policy from 2016 to 2020. And recall that the MAP guide was published in December 18th of 2020. We made the MAP guide effective March 18th, and we allowed for that transition period. And so what we said was, if you have a deal that you prefer to use the elements of the 2016 guide, you could do so, and as long as your deal was submitted prior to March 18th. Well, the lenders took that seriously, and used much of the 2016 guide, particularly for green MIP. And consequently, we went from a queue of 200 applications to 507 for that chart. So our queue is huge. We have numbers ranging from any of the regions, ranging from a minimum of 25 in the Midwest to 125 in the Northeast. So we have a lot of work to do. Helping us with that work is Grove Street, or contract underwriter. Eligible transactions for Grove Street include 223A7s and 223Fs, but the 223Fs are generally those deals that are fairly straightforward. They would not go to National Loan Committee. They wouldn't be RAD deals. They wouldn't have complex environmental issues. We would have to resolve those in any event as an entity. So as a practical matter, it makes sense to give those other deals that they can process quickly and efficiently give them to Grove Street. They've done a very, very good job in doing so. We've over 300 applications have been assigned since they've started. That's 20% of our FY21 total. They also do closing work. We are working to extend their contract to allow more than 300 more applications to get to Grove Street soon to help us with that queue. So that that's where we sit with Grove Street. One last thing, in terms of IT and working virtually, we now have the FHA Catalyst, which is our submission portal. About 60% of the applications are currently submitted through the portal. 70% of the lenders have used the portal at least once. We're looking to get, I'm not sure, frankly, I'm not sure why there isn't more, but we are working with the G letter now. It's going through clearance, and that's going to require mandatory use of the Catalyst. We're told from everybody that does use it, and Michelle, she can attest to it herself, although I'm not sure what her answer is because I didn't ask her, that they to see if it actually works and works well. So we think it does. We hope it does, and we hope to continue to make improvements that would make the industry and our lives a little bit easier. And I think that's the end of my piece, Kathy.
Great, thank you, Tom. Yes, I think we can all attest to HUD being thrown into the deep end of the pool with the pandemic, and as you said, you went from almost entirely paper to no paper without missing a beat. So that's wonderful. I'm wondering, Michelle, do you have thoughts on the queue and Tom? I think I saw on Tom's slide that the average day on the queue might be 75 days. Can either Tom or Michelle, do you have any context for how long this incredible queue is, what effect that has on timing for borrowers?
Mm-hmm. We're seeing that the different regions have different numbers of days for applications in the queue. As Tom said earlier, we're seeing shorter timeframes in the Midwest, and I would say heavier timeframes in the Southwest and Southeast. And it does definitely impact how long it takes to get, underwriter assignment and the firm commitment, which could also potentially delay closing.
Great. And Michelle, have you used the Catalyst?
We have. I'm glad to hear Tom say that they're going to do another training. I think our team would benefit from that, but we have started to use it. Yes.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, thanks, Tom, for that overview. Turning to specifically the map guide, can you highlight 3 or 4 of what you would consider to be the best new features of the map guide?
Sure. So I think just as a general statement, the 2020 guide is dissimilar to, say, the 2016 iteration, in that there isn't a lot of huge changes. What we attempted to do was to really look at the guide and make changes that we thought would be commonsensical, that would assist both us in the industry and in underwriting deals, that would make that would be bring our underwriting up to current standards, and as with regard to our current practice and what we've been doing both with the industry and the field. The LIHTC changes are a perfect example of that. So, but most of them, I think, are more lender centric than restrictive. I think, and Michelle may agree, that the environmental section, Chapter 9, might be a chapter that weighs less heavily towards the lenders and more towards HUD in terms of restrictions. The rest of the chapters really tried to loosen and lighten the load on the practice. The first thing is that we did is the 3-year rule. That was a mortgage letter that we did back in 2020. That eliminated the delay in submission of an application from certificate. There was a delay from the certificate of occupancy to the submission of an application for 3 years. This mortgage letter eliminated that seasoning requirement. And so now, as long as the deal has we can close a deal that has a debt service coverage for the program and the underwriting requirements in place for 3 consecutive months, we can close that deal. So that program, or that piece where we eliminated that seasoning requirement, it did not make any changes to how we process deals that have less than the 3 years. They still are compliant with the 223F program. I mean, everything else was the same. The only thing we eliminated was the seasoning. I guess the observation on deals that we've seen is actually this has worked out pretty well. And this is, I think, one of the best things that we've done in a long time. This allows us to gain far better access to developers and borrowers that we normally wouldn't have seen. We wanted to attract a sort of open the door to borrowers who were more used to working in the conventional setting. This relaxation allowed for deals that we wouldn't normally see, very high-end sort of Class A deals and so on. The underwriting's been pretty good. I'll ask Michelle, I mean, in terms of your practice, I mean, have you worked with have you sent a lot of deals in like this, how are your clients seeing this?
We have. We've seen several. We've submitted several of the 3-year waiver applications, and I agree. I think that's one of the best changes, if not the best change, with the new 2020 guide, that it's part of the guide and doesn't sunset.
So a couple other things we've done. We worked with the LIHTC, MBA LIHTC committee, Kathy, and we actually worked really close with those guys, and we changed a number of areas in Chapter 14 on LIHTCs. For instance, we did require that there would be a 20% cash pay, and we changed that to 10% cash, 10% EBL. Where we had a equity bridge loan, we extended the repayment to 1 year after construction completion for new construction or completion of repairs for an F, or filing the 8609s, whichever's earlier. We delayed funding of the IOD for new construction deals until endorsement. We retained that for market rate deals. For LIHTC deals, we did allow that flexibility. We standardized the use or the elimination of a working capital deposit where you have Section 8 in LIHTC. If there's sufficient interim income, the interim income isn't used as a source of financing. So all of those were negotiated with the committee. So we do want to thank the LIHTC committee for working with us in bringing us up to date on Chapter 14. So that worked well. I'll give one more example and then move on. Is the cost unattributable and the statutory loan limits. This is sort of this doesn't affect everyone. This is really sort of a coastal thing where we have IM properties with other improvements associated with the deal that are not residential. And as many of you know, Criterion 4, which is one of our loan limitations, only reflects on a 223F the residential cost of the project. And so what we decided to do is to allow for the cost not attributable for those properties and include that in criterion 4 to assist in the buildup. The idea being that for criterion 3 and 5, which is valuation and income, we do allow for both the valuation of those commercial areas and also the income for the commercial areas. We should probably also recognize that in the overall cost on an F. So we did so. The other thing that we permitted by waiver is a waiver of the high cost factor from 270 to 315 on a 223F where appropriate. And the last but not least, where we had a D4 that was developed using the high cost factor, 315%, we would allow that 223F to also be processed as a high cost factor without a waiver. So recognizing that the construction risk has passed, this is the refinancing risk. We've dealt with the problem. Now we're making it's an example, I think, of trying to make this common sense. We've dealt with the risk. We're moving forward now with the refinance. Why be restrictive about it? So those are a couple of examples, Kathy.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Tom. Alex, let me bring you into the conversation. How do you feel about these changes from your perspective? Do you have more color to add or items in what Tom was talking about that you may want to highlight or translate for folks less well versed in FHA?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kathy. I mean, I think just generally to start off, the three sort of main categories of changes that Tom mentioned, I think, are really huge for a lot of our clients. I mean, they effectively expand, the opportunity to use FHA. Increased LIHTC is terrific. The 3-year rule, I think, also results in some properties that really wouldn't be able to use FHA to now do so. And the other thing that was a little we haven't entirely flushed out yet, but is sort of part of the new map guide update is really the concept of a heavy 223F with an increased repair threshold. I think when you combine those three, you've really sort of opened the doors to FHA for a lot of projects that probably otherwise might be looking elsewhere, and that's a good thing because it's a great product. A couple things that.
Say a little bit more about that if you could, and folks may not be familiar with what a heavy F is or what the benefit of that might be.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So, a heavy 223F effectively, it increases your per unit repair costs. I think you can go up to 44, what is it? Yeah, I think it's 44,000 per unit, and that's subject to a high cost factor. Under a regular 223F, I think you're capped at 15,000 per unit. Also subject to a high cost factor adjustment depending on where in the country you are. But that's a really big difference. It used to be that you effectively get priced out of FHA in some cases if you've got a significant scope of rehab work because you're above the 223F threshold, at least under the old non-heavy 223F. But you don't want to kick over to the D4 program because once you do that, you're subject to Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirements, which in certain parts of the country can make those deals really hard to pencil out. So, we've had a lot of clients successfully use heavy 223Fs, over the last couple of years, and I imagine that's just going to continue. It's a really terrific option out there because there's a lot of buildings that our clients own that need work, but they don't necessarily need the sub rehab level of work that you'd be doing under the D4 program. So I think the heavy 223F is a great program, and I expect to see a lot of volume there going forward.
Yeah, and it's not just the Davis-Bacon wages, it's also, there's so much more process involved with the D4 as
sure.
well. Yeah. Michelle,
Sure.
what do you think, what are your reactions to the items that Tom had highlighted, or some of the things that Alex brought up?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the changes, the relaxation and the LIHTC program guidance, being able to fund half of that 20% initial equity requirement with an equity bridge loan, and the fact that the equity bridge loan terms have been extended are wonderful, opens up the door for many more projects to qualify. And to Alex's point, the heavy F, it remains attractive because borrowers are able to do a larger scope of work and refinance doing that larger scope of work and not having to pay Davis-Bacon wages. So I agree.
Great. Okay, well, it can't all be can't all be fun and games. As Tom mentioned, many of the changes are very more pro borrower than as he said, pro HUD. Although Tom, I don't think it's a purely adversarial with booth situation. Can you highlight though, Tom, some of the tighter standards that the borrower should be aware of that have come through in the revisions?
Yeah, so there's one that's actually a little controversial, and that is the when repairs can start on a Section 223F, non-critical repairs, and it's controversial. So what the requirement in the MAP guide is that the repairs cannot begin until the environmental review has been completed, and this is it's a little interesting because it's part of NEPA, and it's also part of 24 CFR Part 50, and it was in the 2016 MAP guide, but was never detailed, and it was essentially ignored as a matter of policy. When we modified the choice limiting action language for new construction to move that to the federal nexus, the application, which we felt was a benefit to the industry. We also had to look at the choice limiting action in terms of Section 223F and then apply that same restriction. And so what's happened is again, while this looks like a new policy, it really, it is only because it has never been fully enforced in the past. It was always there. And so what happens is many of the lenders who had repairs that were doing repairs while the project was in processing, or even now, that problem becomes exacerbated because you have deals in the queue that are lasting queues a long time. They could do the repairs now. We're saying that they can, and of course, we're getting complaints, and so the deal on that is it's an interesting problem. I don't know if there's a lot we could do about it, except I think we certainly can communicate the issue that we're facing a little bit better. And we was talking with several lenders. I understand that the FHA committee is going to set up a working group to discuss this, to work on creating a bit more visibility the issue, right? But that is a restriction, and we'll have to work through it. A second restriction, much less controversial, is where we have there's a requirement that if the property or if your application has repairs of $15,000 or more per unit, we would want to see generally an architect and a general contractor. And the reason for that is what we've seen in the past working is Alex has mentioned with the heavy Fs. I mean, your rehab range or your repair range on an F can be from $0 to $40-some thousand. And what we've been seeing is there's sort of a spot of $15,000 to $20,000 to $25,000 in repairs. And we did require an architect, but some of those repairs can become complex. And so what we said as a general rule, that if the per unit repairs are $15,000 or more, then we would want to see an architect and general contractor. We've mollified that slightly by saying, look, if the repairs are primarily limited to level 1 alterations, or if the owner has substantial experience and has proven ability to plan, to stage, to coordinate trades, and so on and so forth, then we'll look at that. Because not every, I mean, so it was important for us to say, look, we want to protect our interest that if you have a property that is inherently complex, but the numbers don't prove it, we want to make sure that we have the means by which to coordinate that effort. At the same time, we don't want to make this prescriptive and say 15,000, that's it, you're done. There's a wide range of variation, so we would hope that we provide that flexibility with that. There's the other note on that with the rehab versus refinance. Alex alluded to that. I think you did too, Kathy. Was the what constitutes a building? I'm sorry, a refinance versus rehab, and one of the criteria was the 2 building systems rule. And if you had more than 2 systems, which was say a foundation or plumbing or HVAC, then if you had those 2 systems, that would constitute sub rehab. And it over time that became a little unwieldy. And what was the system and how much was it and what are you doing and how does this cost anyway? And so he said, deal with it. And we'll just say, look, if you hit the $15,000 times a high cost factor in that area, you go above that, you're sub rehab. You go below that, you're refinance. Makes it very simple. And so that's also consistent with what we view as a heavy F. That's the 15,000 times high cost factor. So those are some of the more larger restrictions that we placed in the guide this year.
Great, thank you. Michelle and Alex, do you have what's your perspective? Do you have other stricter standards that you'd like to highlight, or do you have some color to add to some of the items that Tom was talking about?
So I will say the impact of choice limiting to the 223F program is definitely a concern for our clients. Owners, of course, would prefer to be able to work on their non-critical repairs while the apps are waiting in the queue. And, you know, as a lender, we're not 100% clear on how HUD would like us to document the completion of the repairs that are done prior to the application submission. And then the flip side of that is, you know, towards the end of the process, we're not always informed by HUD staff that their environmental review has been completed, that HEROES is approved. So we're making an internal effort to make sure that we are keeping the lines of communication open with the underwriters at HUD to know that we've gotten that green light that we can pass along to the client so that they know that they can start those repairs.
Yeah, I would echo the same thing. You know, from my perspective, a lot of our clients, you know, will typically try to get the non-critical repairs done, you know, when they can before closing in order to, you know, to bring that escrow amount down, or in some cases to reduce, you know, further reduce a holdback of cash out equity, and not, you know, being limited in, you know, up until the point that you can do that work. It can be challenging, and especially, you know, given all the uncertainty around the rules right now, I think it puts a lot of clients in a tough spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that in the map guide, there's also been a number of updates with respect to environmental review. Tom, Michelle, Alex, do any of you want to talk about some of the updates with to Chapter 6 and some of the other, not just choice limiting activity trigger date, but some of the other environmental impacts?
Well, with the flood insurance requirements, and perhaps Alex and Michelle can maybe talk about some of the others, but the flood insurance, what we did there is we added language that, we'll put it this way, currently, or in the 2016 guide, we could impose the requirement of flood insurance only in a property that was in a flood zone. And so with the changes that have been occurring with climate and with some of the applications that we've seen, where we've had situations where a property would be consistently have high water, and water would actually go up to the building or the front door and so on, but the property wouldn't be in a floodplain. We think that those sorts of situations are only going to get worse, not better. And so we allowed ourselves some latitude in the guide to allow for the requirement of flood insurance where there's been past flooding, or there's it would appear that there's a high risk of flood events could occur. So we have done that. We've also required flood insurance, so the maximum flood insurance available for the type of property under the National Flood Insurance Program, and also increase that to the extent necessary to the replacement cost of the bottom 2 stories above grade. So we think that is a common sense. Well, let's put it this way. So we are in essence insurers. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, not the government, but actually insurers, I think you would probably have to agree that most insurers would be are looking at climate change as a risk, and we want to do the same thing. So that's why we've included that in the guide. So that would be my piece.
Yeah, Alex and Michelle, do you guys have a different perspective?
I mean, I see where HUD's coming from on that for sure. I mean, it's an issue, and it seems a policy decision on flood matters. So I mean, we see where they're coming from for sure. I guess I can talk a little bit about Energy Star maybe. I think that's kind of one we're getting a decent amount of questions on. So the reduced MIPs that came out 5 or so years ago, I think were the hot topic for a lot of our clients. Anytime you can bring down those MIPs, it helps your project out. And so Energy Star had been a pretty common way for our clients to access the reduced green MIP, and effectively under the new map guide, HUD is phasing that out. First, I think it's now only available for projects with COs issued within 3 years of the loan application. So that that curtails that significantly. And I think my understanding is that it's going to be phased out entirely by December of 2022. And so that's a main reason I think why you saw a huge spike in loan applications under the existing map guide last month. People wanted to get in under that, under that reduced MIP for Energy Star. So just something for borrowers to be aware of, because if you use that before, you're probably not going to be able to do that going forward.
Yeah, this is just as to provide some explanation, Alex. I mean, so we still allow for green buildings for new construction, sub rehab. We would allow it for refinances. What we did eliminate was Energy Star for existing buildings as a certification and a standard. And what we found was that we were getting applications that we were only getting a minimal score. The score that we had to see was 75, and we were getting projects that were 20 years old with no repairs, but they were scoring, it's a 77 and saying, why not? How about my certification? And we get 1 or 2 of those, and okay, but you get a whole boatload. You're saying, well, what there's a problem here. And so I think that's kind of what happened was we just said, look, we need to have a more robust application of green that's consistent with the intent of the Federal Register notice back in 2016. And the idea was that there would be certain improvements made to actually enhance energy ratings and energy consumption. And so there's right now, we want to see 100% sampling. We want to see a plan that would require an ongoing improvements that would allow for getting that certification. So we think we're getting back to where the intent was originally, but obviously that's arguable. So I mean, and it is a hit. I don't disagree.
Michelle, what are you seeing on the environmental front? Is there anything that you as lenders or your borrowers are chafing about?
Yeah, aside from what has already been discussed, there are tighter regulations on radon testing. So that's made a significant impact on our property owners who are have properties located in Zone 3. 100% of the ground floor units is that's a costly addition to the third-party reports. We've seen increased asbestos requirements for roofing, so that's made a significant impact. And we're hearing from our vendors, the SHPO requirements are more lengthy now and sort of adding more days to the timeline. So I agree with Tom. He said in the beginning that while there is a balance, there's a balance, right? There lighter restrictions, loosened restrictions on LIHTC in the 3-year, but environmental rules seem to have gotten hit pretty hard.
And sorry.
Go ahead, Kathy.
I was going to move on. If you have more to say on the environmental, Tom, go ahead.
Oh, but the only thing is the radon. I mean, Michelle's correct. I'm a little surprised on the 106 though, because what we did with the map guide was allow for a lender delegation to contact the shippers directly and submit those applications, which frankly was no small feat when working with CPD. As much as we love CPD, but it was a year plus effort in getting through that. So it was we had hoped that would be a win for us. So maybe we should talk on that. And that's something that I think that is, as you suggest, Michelle, a better communication or more communication as we roll out the guide as to how we're doing and why we're doing it, and see if we're all on the same page on that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
And to qualify that, I guess I would just add, I think there's more of an impact, Tom, on the applications that weren't able to get submitted under 317. So now that the rules have changed under the 2020 guide, we're seeing that we need to go back and start that process, right? Because now we're delegated to do it. I think in the future, we know that we're going to be submitting under the 2020 guide. So that will be part of the process when we engage those environmental reports earlier. I think there's a window of time there where some applications are more impacted than others will be going forward.
Yeah, we should talk. We'll put that on the clipboard, the blackboard.
Sounds good.
We're coming up to the top of the hour. Are there other items, Alex and Michelle, that you may want to hit on in terms of borrower beware? Other updates in the map guide?
I can hit on a couple of these really quickly. I mean, the debt service reserve during COVID, I mean, that's continuing obviously for market projects, 9 months debt service. If you're LIHTC or I think greater than 90% PBRA, you're exempt, but know that that's continuing. And also on condos, we never saw a lot of these, frankly, to begin with for FHA. I think I've done a couple over the course of my career, but condo regimes on new construction deals, HUD effectively says, in the new map guide that unless there's a really good reason to do one, that they would prefer not to. Tom, is that sort of accurate?
I think that's dead on. Yeah. Yep.
So.
We've had trouble, Alex. We've had two deals. And you're right. These don't happen often, but when they do happen, they can be particularly thorny. And we had 2 issues that had to go before the OGC and the DAS last year to determine whether the zoning actually permitted residential apartments, within this condominium regime we've created. And we're like, well, you know what, for the few that we do, this is too much like work. I mean, if we have a clean deal that with clear zoning and clear entitlements, we can look at it, and we'll probably end up, working with you because we want to. But other than that, if it's the thorny and if the letters are confused and the ordinance, is murky, would just assume not. That's kind of where that sits. So I think you're exactly right.
Michelle, what about those increased debt service reserves and escrows? What's your perspective been? Have borrowers sort of taken those in stride, or is there grumbling?
We're hearing, not everyone's happy about it. Obviously, we're dealing with it. I think the thing that we're struggling with of recent is that, prior to the 2020 guide, a lot of the applications that are in that have recently been committed, headed towards closing, do not fall under the new choice limiting. So the clients have been able to complete those repairs while the applications have been at HUD. And we're finding that not always are we able to reduce those escrows upon documentation that those repairs are completed prior to closing. And so that's been a discussion a couple of times in different regions. So something that we're working through with HUD to try to make sure that we find a balance there. We understand that there is a requirement there for the debt service and the 250% repair escrows, but if the client was able to complete some or all of those repairs prior to closing, can we find some, balance to be able to eliminate some of that escrow, since it ties up their funds for at least 6 months post-closing?
Yeah, Michelle's correct on that. One of the things we did most recently was what had happened is there was an effort, understandably, to modify the commitment, to amend the commitment to reflect the reduction or the completion of repairs to reduce the escrow. But what was happening was we were getting, in some cases, one amendment. In some cases, there were multiple amendments over a short period of time. And so the various offices reacted differently. And some said, okay, we'll do them. And some said, well, no, we won't do any. And then some said, well, we'll do one. And then some said that we'll do one, but only if all the repairs are completed. And we're like, wait a minute, guys. Well, hold on. So we had a discussion in the last month, and we worked out what we would do. And we did mention this at ELA, and what the current policy, and I hope our folks are sticking to it, is that we will allow one amendment for all non-critical repairs prior to endorsement. So we don't want multiple amendments, because part of the problem here is much like you all, but you all being lenders, is we also have a pipeline. We also have a process. And so when you get multiple waivers or multiple amendments rather, and that's just not for that, you're getting through interest rates and so on and so forth. I mean, you spend a good bit of your time responding to those amendments. And so what we said, with just for non-critical repairs, we can have amendments for anything else, but just for non-critical repairs, we will permit one amendment, complete all your repairs, send it in prior to endorsement, give us sufficient time to process it. And generally that means 30 days prior to endorsement. And that is not set in stone. Some regions say 15 is fine. Some regions say 20 is fine, whatever. But whatever that region thinks they can incorporate into their system, then allow for us to do that non-critical repair escrow. Because in many cases, if the repairs are complicated, we need to have an inspector go out and review. So we'd have to arrange for that. You have to go visit the site, that kind of thing. So there is a complication or a certain complexity or potential for complexity on our part. So I think if that was the arrangement. I think that was thought to be a reasonable solution. I hope.
Great. One thing I also want to mention is, we talked a lot about environmental. We don't have a ton of time to get into too much detail left, but do just want to mention for folks listening that we have been seeing a lot more on the fair housing side being brought up front and center, including UFAS repairs and accessibility repairs, as sometimes even critical repairs to be done, where in the past there might have been more leeway on having repairs be deemed UFAS renovations be deemed as infeasible under the 504 standards. Now we're seeing that come up more front and center. I don't know if folks want to just leave that there, or if they have, if anybody has any thoughts on that topic. Then we will move on to the closing guide. The closing guide was a standalone document, and the map guide revisions have incorporated it back into the map guide as Chapter 19. Alex, we're attorneys. We gotta talk closing. Can you walk us through the map guide, the closing guide changes?
Sure. Happy to. As somebody who closes a lot of FHA deals in the trenches, this is very near and dear to my heart. So happy to talk about it. So I actually, the next couple slides have a good amount of information, and they're going to be available to everybody. I think they'll go around in an email after the presentation. So I'm not going to go through them in great detail, but I'll just sort of hit the kind of broad points. And you can feel free to read them for yourselves for the details. But the upshot of the changes to the closing guide, which, as Kathy pointed out, used to be a standalone document, is now rolled into part of the map guide. But the upshot is really to try to establish more uniform requirements and procedures for closing, which I think is a great idea and really helpful, and something that is encouraging to see, frankly. I think a lot of our clients are often frustrated with the HUD process because, it seems like you submit a package and, you deal with comments for weeks and you don't know when you're going to have a closing date, and then all of a sudden, poof, it materializes. And so I think that the changes here kind of go a long way to try to streamline that process and avoid some of the uncertainty. And so what the sort of key concept that the change to the closing guide sets out is this idea of a tentative closing date. And so basically, you can start discussing the closing date with HUD upon issuance of the firm commitment, and a tentative closing date can be set at that time even. I think seems like the way this is playing out so far, there's a little bit of flexibility in the offices, and that you might not actually have that conversation until your closing package gets submitted, but nonetheless, it's happening a lot sooner than it used to, which is really helpful. It keeps everybody, I think, focused on targets and dates and timing, and just it allows for a more smooth closing process, has been my experience so far. That said, the other side of that coin is that in order to maintain that predictability, there's some gating requirements. There's some timing restraints and some new requirements that HUD's created. And so essentially, you need to submit a draft closing package at least 30 days before your tentative closing date. And if you don't do that, your tentative closing date might get revised or pushed back. And at the same time, when you do receive HUD comments, they need to be addressed within 5 business days of receipt of those comments, which, we're always hopeful we can respond in a few days. 5 is probably, pretty reasonable, but, it's a challenge timing wise. So it's something to be aware of. And then, I was really pleased to see that HUD, kind of took under consideration and realized that, there are certain documents that can't be submitted until pretty close to closing, like your status certificates and your search results in some cases. So those can come in later. but I think probably ultimately the the key the key sort of corollary change with all of these is that it really, and I think the change to the map guide is pretty explicit on this in a few points, that it creates the opportunity to engage with OGC earlier in the process, right? There's language in the map guide that basically says, that the lender can request legal feedback on issues at the application stage, and that the lender can provide a narrative outlining legal issues at the time of submission of the package. And I think that those are both really, really helpful changes from the borrower perspective, because there are sometimes thorny legal issues on these transactions, and to be able to really get out in front of them and engage with OGC early on in the process is hugely helpful, because I know from experience a lot of our clients were often frustrated with this feeling that you have something that you would love to get HUD's feedback on, but you don't really even have anyone you can ask until you have a firm commitment, and sometimes not even until your loan package is submitted. So, my message to borrowers on those would be, do not hesitate, and in fact be flagging and raising and asking questions about legal issues early on in the process, because there's now a much much clearer path, I think, to get answers on some of those questions, which in turn will help the closing process, and I think help help everybody stick to the timing the timing requirements and the gating hurdles that I mentioned earlier. So that's it on the closing guide that I have, but feel free to read through the slides.
Alex, do you want to announce the CLE CPE code before we open the floor up for questions?
Yeah, that's great. Sure. So the CLE CPE forms and instructions are going to be circulated following the program. I'm going to read the verification code right now. It's also on the slide. It is NPCLE 42221. And that's NPCLE 42221. And if you're seeking continuing education credits, you should complete and return certificates of attendance and evaluation forms to Vanessa York, and her info's on the slide, vyork@nixonpeabody.com. And certificates of completion will be emailed within 45 days after the webinar. So Kathy, back to you,
Great.
Q&A.
All right, great. Let's open the floor up to Q&A. We've already gotten some questions in. So let's, great, we'll slide forward. Here are some additional resources will be provided in the slides, and questions. First question, we've got a couple of questions about the 3-year rule. And as you had talked about, Tom, one question is, when HUD is underwriting a 223F that only has 1 month of debt service coverage, what will you consider during the underwriting? Which would you consider more, the projected 12-month financial or the limited actual data? So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, you would, and this, I could hear Michelle as well, but if you put it this way, you may have 1 month debt service, 1 month debt service programmatic coverage, but you will have trailing 6, trailing 3s, trailing 12s of operating income, right? You will have an appraisal, which would detail what those rents would be for this particular project within the market, right? And so you would also have leasing details, not projections, but actually leasing history. So you could determine what that leasing velocity is, how quickly it's being absorbed into the market, where you think this deal would be. So I think you would look at all of those factors. I don't think we would too closely, although we would, I don't think we would rely very heavily on projection. Simply that would be, we could look at an appraiser and see what the appraiser wants to say. But I think for the most part, where we want to see is what that deal is renting for, what the rents are currently, what concessions exist and how they're burned off. And how this project seems to be positioning itself in the market.
What do you think, Michelle? Is that spot on?
Yeah, I agree completely. We look at the rent roll and what they're actually achieving and consider concessions, and if the market is also heavy on concessions, and absolutely right. Yep.
We have another question that's asking in terms of 223Fs and D4s, when you're underwriting with a meaningful rehab, your expenses are going to presumably change post rehab. How do you underwrite that? Do you look at only historical expenses, or are you underwriting pro forma expenses going forward? Projected.
I think that's a Michelle question.
We do look to historical, but we understand that there are some expense line items that might change because of the scope of the work. So I can't say that it's a one size fits all, but we do analyze historical. We look at that in conjunction with the scope of work. We're considering the chart of accounts, if they're pulling anything out of the replacement reserves that they will expense at the project level going forward. All of those things play into how we're building out our expense projections.
Great. We have another question here. How does HUD value land, and has there been any changes to how HUD values land and how it can contribute to a deal? Tom?
There's been no changes. I mean, we value land. We take comparables. We'll look at the typical suspects: location, access, sales. I mean, and make that determination. I mean, we'll put it this way. We actually, let me step back. We don't actually value it. We require the appraiser to value it. We would look at that valuation to make sure it's reasonable, but we as part of USPAP, we would not value it per se. We would look at it to make sure that whatever methodology that the appraiser used in determining that value is actually sound and reasonable and consistent.
What do you think, Michelle?
Agreed. I agreed. I don't know if the question is asking if we're looking at the land value differently in comparison to the purchase price of the land, but that's something that we would consider as well.
Got it. What about high cost factor? Does land come into play when you're calculating high cost factors and those upper limits?
We can use 100% of land value in our calculation, in that criterion for calculation. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And we also have a question specifically about high cost factors. Can you guys speak a little bit more about how those are determined when you're waiving the high cost or when you're applying the high cost multiples? There's limited areas that applies to, but we're getting one of the questions is saying, look, particularly what about areas like Denver? It's not listed as a high cost area, but construction costs have been through the roof there, and I think there's a lot of places recently where construction costs have been raised a lot higher. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think there's a methodology that we use that's been it's based upon the consumer price index, based upon increases in costs for Marshall and Swifts. So it is a model that's been developed by PD&R, and we've used it for decades. I do understand the question in the sense that you have cities like Denver or perhaps Miami that you would automatically assume would get to 300%, 350% high cost factor. In fact, they're 270. And so why would we not, or why would you not allow that waiver in those areas? And it's because of the costs in when we determine the use of the high cost factor, the methodology would report back that this area just, as a practical matter, does not have those high costs in relation to other costs in the country. So it's based upon not that city, what it is, but it's also based upon its relation to the rest of the cost in the United States. So it's a broader look.
Tom, is that sort of a live model, or is that a sort of a fixed list that was that's generated and needs to be updated, or is it factors that it's live?
That's a good question. We've had conversations with the industry. I think actually maybe a year back. Then there was a committee that was developed, and we talked about is it Marshall and Swift? Is it some other source? What do we use? And I don't think that it really, the conclusions were such that there was no real suggestions that we could use. We did this year look to view the quote unquote econometrics of the high cost factor, because we're working on this year's amendment. And it also appears that the model that we're using actually makes sense. So I think if your question is, should we be doing something different? We've looked at it kind of twice, Kathy, and we haven't found a better way to skin the cat.
All right. Alex, we have a question here about heavy Fs. How does a heavy F processing and closing differ from a normal F processing and closing?
I mean, the heavy F is sort of a curious concept, right? Because it's not a regular F, it's also not a D4, and it really lies somewhere in the middle is the best answer that I can give on that. I mean, there's some additional, upfront documents at the application stage, and then there's additional legal documents in connection with closing, like the construction contract and owner architect agreement that Tom mentioned earlier. So I think it's frankly been a little bit of a changing standard. When they first started, they kind of ran on very similar tracks to a regular F, and now they probably take a little longer, frankly, but not as long as a D4, if that's a helpful answer. But again, everything now is subject to the queue, so it's sort of they're probably taking longer than they used to. So.
Well, I see where. Oh, go ahead, Michelle. Were you gonna add in?
No.
Okay. I see we're coming up on our time, so I'm going to say last call for to the for the questions. So get your questions in now. And Alex and Michelle, do you have any burning issues that you've been wanting to highlight, or burning questions that you want to ask Tom while we have him on the hot seat?
I've got one. I was just going to ask Tom sort of how you've got the 15,000 per unit and the 44,000 per unit threshold for, your regular and your heavy F on repairs, and it's subject to the high cost factor. But outside of the high cost factor adjustments, do those numbers get looked at periodically, and what is the timing of that? I mean, we're hearing from a lot of clients that construction costs are up, all around the country, basically. And I'm curious if that's something that HUD, looks at regularly, or it's just kind of set and you rely on the high cost factor to adjust those numbers, or is it a little bit of both?
Well, recall in 2016, we had a limitation on repair or for refinance of, it was like 4,000, 4,400. It hadn't been updated for years and years and years. And I think it was like 4,000 or 8,000, I can't remember. But we increased that to 15 because that seemed to be a figure that was appropriate for inflation at that time. And then of course that increases every year with the statutory limits. As statutory limits increase, that number increases as well. But that's really it, Alex, and there's nothing. We want to keep it simple. We want to keep it manageable. We want to keep it so we can, everybody more or less understands it. And so far, it seems to work in that we've been capturing sufficient amount of deals that would be Fs that would have significant repairs versus pushing them into the sub-rehab category. So it seems to work.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay, we got one more burning question in asking us about the relocation requirements. Can you touch on the requirement for third-party relocation specialists to develop the relocation plan and provide services to residents?
Yeah. So what we found was that we were getting a lot of deals that did require relocation. We had a lot of 4% repaired 223F type transactions. And so, and of course, we had some rehabs as well that were, 4%. So we had a little mixture of everything. Bottom line, though, is there was a lot of internal relocation that was for deals that were not Section 8, primarily LIHTC. And so the relocation ERA rules didn't apply. At the same time, we're finding that the relocation plans that we were getting were sometimes spotty. They were sort of creating additional. They weren't recognizing the disruption that was being caused by the construction or the repairs, and this displacement of the residents. And that was sort of exacerbated by the fact of COVID, right? Because when we were looking at people living in a unit and trying to move them around, that created additional complications, particularly with an elderly population, because now you're talking about moving those folks around either internally or moving them off-site. And when you move off-site in the middle of a pandemic, the question is, where are they going and how is that going to work? And where are the amenities? And so when you take a frail population, that creates we sort of looked at that as an issue. And so the changes in a nutshell is we want to see a relocation plan that's clear. If a consultant is necessary, we're suggesting that a consultant be used. We want to see a rehabilitation plan that determines the extent of resident disruption defined as health and safety, elderly, of course, in a COVID situation, when temporary relocation is in order. If you can't use the amenities in your unit, kitchen, bedroom, so on, for 8 consecutive hours, or if there's just general disruption, dust and debris, that sort of thing. So we sort of specified that, laid that out in the map guide. We were hoping that borrowers and general contractors, when you have those situations, will be sensitive towards the needs of the residents. This is so it's really more of a step to raise the awareness of those folks in those situations. So
great, thanks. Well, with that, we are officially over time. Thank you all for joining us. I think this has been a really fruitful and full conversation. Thank you so much, Tom, Michelle, Alex, and to all of our participants. We will be again sending around the slides and the recording in a follow-up email. And we know that you all have a lot more FHA work to do with those production numbers. So with that, we'll call it a day. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
thank you.